Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do an overview of All Our Brothers, designed by Kim Kanger and published by Legion Wargames. This game covers the Battle of Solferino, which was the culminating battle in the Italian Second War of Independence. A little bit of background on the battle before we look at the game. France had allied together with Sardinia to try to push out Austrian influence from Italy. And in this battle, Austria, which had about 250,000 troops on both sides fighting, about 40,000 casualties. It was the largest battle since, I think, 1813. And it was also, interestingly enough, the last battle in world history whereby monarchs were the leaders of the combatants on the battlefield. So Austria lost this battle significantly. Just a matter of a few weeks later, an armistice was signed that was instrumental in the formation of Italy. An interesting historical side note about this battle as well: after the battle was over, a Swiss businessman and humanitarian, Henri Dunant, was touring the battlefield and was appalled by the horrific indifference to which wounded soldiers were treated on a battlefield. Afterwards, he formed it was instrumental in forming both the Geneva Convention and the International Red Cross. So a lot of historical significance to this battle. Let's jump right in and take a look at the game. So here is All Our Brothers spread out in all its glory in front of us. Let's do a quick overview of the game before we jump in and explore the components. The designer is Kim Kanger. Publisher, of course, is Legion Wargames, and this is published in 2025. Now, the back of the box lists it as a 1 to 2 player game, but it's important to note there isn't a solo bot or a system for playing the solitaire. It's just, I think, a very friendly, solitaire-friendly game, and we'll talk more about that as we dig into things. Now, the historical length of this game is anywhere from 2 hours to 14 hours. Basically, the historical length, the day of the battle, if you would. And each turn represents 1 hour of time. And there are 5 scenarios in this game. There's one very short 2-turn learning scenario. Then there are 3 medium scenarios and a full campaign, the full battle, if you would. And the gameplay length listed on these is pretty big. We got 4 to 6 hours for the medium scenario, and then 12 plus hours for that full game for the entire Battle of Solferino. Unit scale for this is brigades and batteries. Let's now highlight a few of the mechanics to get an idea of what gameplay is going to involve. First up, the biggest thing to say is that this design is based on the Blind Swords system. And that's a game design system typically used for Civil War, U.S. Civil War games. And in particular, this game is designed based on the system used in At Any Cost. Now, what does that mean? Well, a lot of the mechanics that we'll look at now are elements of this system. Basically, one of the key features of it is that we're going to have things like morale. Units will break or get shaken, and then you can rally, or they could get disrupted. So there's an entire system for morale and breaking of units that comes into play with this game. But the key component of a blind sword system is what's called that chit draw. Basically, there are going to be little counters dropped in a cup that you're going to pull out to activate a certain portion of your troops. They could also be events that you're pulling out. So there are event chits in this game. Now, this makes for, I think, a very solo-friendly system, because you're pulling it out, you kind of got to play what's dealt. So you're bouncing back and forth between sides, but it's a really fun system for solitaire. So I think if I were to give this game a solitaire rating, I would go a 6.5 out of 10. Now, there's nothing really in here that I see that would be hidden information that would even kind of get in the way of playing a solitaire version. A few other things. We have commanders-in-chief. As I mentioned in the intro, this was the last battle in history where emperors led their armies into battle with both sides. And then we have postures for the game, which are either aggressive or defensive. Headquarters, and that involves, of course, command and range. I mentioned the event chits and events. There's also an assault system, cavalry charges, flank attacks. Units can be engaged. And there's a very interesting front line limit of 6 strength points. And what's that mean? It sounds like you can have more than that in a hex, but only 6 strength points can be kind of up at that front line engaged in battle. So there's an overview of our mechanics. Let's jump in now and take a look at some of the components. Let's take a look at our documentation. We've got a scenario booklet and then the core rules booklet. The core rules booklet here is on glossy white paper. It's 20 pages long. Rules go pretty much through the whole thing. We've got some designer notes on page 19, a little bit of a special rule for a thunderstorm that happened during the battle here on page 18. But mostly the rules are these first 18 pages. Text is pretty big. We got 2 columns. It's fairly widely spread out.
It doesn't look like, in looking through this, especially if you're familiar with the blind sword system, if you've played a game in that system before, I think this is going to be a very comfortable and smooth learning experience. But it's not complicated even if you haven't played that type of game before. A lot of the rules, as I was looking through them, the writing makes sense, things seem pretty clear, and a lot of the concepts are pretty intuitive. Not a ton of graphics in this, but there are a few helpful graphics in terms of explaining how things work. And overall, I think I would give this a 4 out of 10 on the complexity scale. So certainly not a game that should scare someone away with any kind of volume of rules or overall complexity of rules. This is the 12-page scenario booklet that has the information for all 5 scenarios. This front page here actually is the shorter one, that the learning scenario that's only 2 turns long. And then we go into our 3 kind of core scenarios, if you would. San Martino here, and then the Campo di Medale, and then the Heights of Solferino. Now, it's interesting to note that these medium-length scenarios are longer games, too. They're just as long as the full game, so 2 to 14 turns, 1 to 14 turns. So they're full turn, they're full-day battles. They just concentrate on a particular aspect, a particular area of the battle. And then we get to the We Are Brothers, the Battle of Solferino, the entire big battle here, 14 turns, the one that will take 10 hours or more, 12 hours or more to play. So very clear, easy to help. We also have some historical notes on the back here to flesh out the document, and then an event description chart. We mentioned there are these event chits that could get pulled out of the cup, and this explains what happens when those events get pulled. Counters, 350 counters in all. These are 6/10 of an inch wide counters, so bigger than a ½ inch. 2 counter sheets consisting of all the forces from both sides, printed on both sides. The back side here with this gray stripe is a battle-worn state, so a reduced state for the troops as they're fighting. Some of these here are markers, as we see in the bottom left here, but we're looking now at the Austrian setup. If we were to just briefly explain what's on one of these counters, the top right is the morale, the number in the red there. So this is kind of getting at that morale and braking system, and then rally and all these elements. Then we have movement is in the middle, so this is a 4. And then the strength points down here, 6 for the unit, is the one in the bottom right. Also, cavalry, if we look over here for cavalry, they have a weight class that's identified by this either green circle or blue box. And then we have a number of markers down here. Here are the shaken markers, whether artillery's been fired or not, control to mark that. And then the back side, we have the disrupted counters in the reduced state here. Let's jump over and take a look now at the French and Sardinian forces. These are used for the event. These are our event chits, more shaken. Low ammo is a factor. And then just a bunch, nice clean counter set with a lot of good information on it. So it looks like it's going to work really well. Both sides look really different, and looks like it's going to be a great functional counter set. Player aid time. Let's take a look at our player aids. There's a pretty hefty collection of them here, so it'll take a minute to go through them, but this is our game turn track and morale core track, and then victory point track. And victory points in the scenarios are the determining factor for who wins. They're simply placed, they fall into mostly 2 categories, one of which is controlling various locations on the map, and then the second is damaging enemy units, breaking them and demoralizing them and elements along those lines. So a fairly standard victory point system that's balanced out for each scenario, and each scenario has its own unique kind of circumstances and set of victory points. Then we have our tables and charts. This is the fire combat table. So again, shifting and talking about all the different systems that can influence how combat results happen. And then this is the assault combat table. So this is when one unit is moving into very close range and attacking from that range. So both of these are single-sided, and you get 1 in the game, so you'll be sharing those. Then we have our terrain chart here. This gives all of the information you need to be able to play and kind of interpret the various terrain and elevations on the map. We also have 2 what are called force displays. So this is probably a good time to talk about stacking. Stacking in the game is 11 strength points per hex. And so when some of these units get depleted, or you have some smaller 2 strength point units, the rules mention that you occasionally will have a few stacks that are pretty high. And you don't have to do this, but if you want to facilitate these, there are some force markers down here, counters that look like this, force 1, 2, 3, 4. You can replace that stack of unit with the force counters, and then put the stack of units from bottom unit all the way up and top and spread them out in here. That makes it easier to see what's in the stack. Things don't get so congested. It doesn't look like it happens fairly often, probably more in that larger Battle of Solferino scenario would be my guess, but there are room for 8 of these down here, and you've got 8 force markers. And you have them again for either side. So 1 for the Austrians, and then 1 for the French and Sardinian setup. And then over here, we're tracking some other things, broken units, and then some event chit boxes. We have one more player aid. This is the event description chart. This parallels that last page in the rulebook that gives you some help interpreting if you pull a chit out of the cup, what you're supposed to do, what this means, and how you take care of that. So it's really basically an aid for executing the event chit pulls. We are not done yet. These are the setup charts. I love these things. These are so helpful. These are 8.5 by 11 double-sided. So what would that be? 17 by 11 for each of these. So you will want to account for these in your gameplay footprint. As we take a look at the map, you want to add how you're going to spread these in. These are really cleverly done too. You'll notice that it shows the unit and then it shows the band underneath it with the hex number in it. And these different colored bands there's a key for them down here. Each one of these is the 5 scenarios. So in scenario 1, this learning scenario, you've only got this very small amount of the orange units there. And then in All Our Brothers, the big battle, the big one, you can see the dark red bar, which are here. Then the blue, we've only got a smaller subset of units for this scenario. San Martino, the yellow, so this yellow one only has these units in here. And so forth. And we can see the same thing works here for the French and Sardinian setup. So really clever way to take what could be a lot of player aids, boil them down into 2, one for each player, and make them work for all 5 scenarios. This is a really just smart design. It just seems like it's going to be really helpful. And I love that you can drop the counters down on here and then put them on the map, put them right on the map with the hex numbers. Really well done. This is such an aid to speeding up the setup of the game. So kudos for having these in the game. I really like these. Map time. And before we do, I'll also point out we have 3 dice, a 10-sided die and then 2 6-sided dice to help us execute all of the game functions. Now, this is a 22-inch by 34-inch standard Wargame size map. It's a glossy type paper. And I do want to point out too that this is a vertically oriented game, but I've put it horizontal with the bottom of the map over here just because it's easier to show on a video screen if the map is horizontal. A lot of terrain features come into play here. We've got some elevation here in the middle. Solferino is right here in the middle of the map. Looks like a lot of farmland and pastoral land over here, laced with some roads, and we've got some rivers that come into play up here on the right side of the map as we look at this way. To me, this is a very kind of minimalist design. There's not a ton of color here, but I think when you add the units, I think it's really going to pop. I always like to see the balance between units and map. Seems, though, however, that it's going to be, I think, very functional. Like you're not going to be struggling to interpret elevation or rivers or anything like that. It's going to play very clean, which is always really nice to see. So I'll show some close-ups on the map. This is probably a good time to talk a little bit about the sequence of play. And again, if you're familiar with the blind sword system, it's going to sound familiar. There's going to be a planning phase to the turn. And then once you get that, this is kind of putting in your chits into the cup. You're going to start pulling out chits out of this cup, and that's going to activate a certain unit. Or a certain group of units. And then those units can do fire combat, and then movement, and then assault, and then rally. And you're going to be going back and forth with this activation phase. So most of the game is this activation phase where, both sides are pulling chits out of a cup and seeing which units get activated. And then lastly, we have an end turn phase that's going to wrap things up and clean things up for the next turn. So I really like, my experiences with the blind sword system have all been positive. It is really, I think, a nice balance between complexity and playability, and I think it works really well for this era of combat, the 1800s or so. So really interested to give this one a shot and see how it plays out, especially, all my experience with blind swords has been in the American Civil War system so far. So really excited about this one. Really pretty game. Kudos to Legion Wargames for another fine production. If you liked this video overview, I might also guide you to another Legion Wargame that we did an overview for, A Glorious Chance, which is the battle for Lake Ontario in the War of 1812. That one fully solitaire. Thanks for watching, everybody.